Hey guys, Charlie Murphy here, about to jump into another session of 1-2 no limit 6 max regular tables on Ignition. The tables are up and running, so let's jump right in. Get a cutoff open. We're on the buttons with Queen Queen. We're going to 3-bet that. We'd be 3-betting about a 13% range here, absent some reason to deviate. Probably any suited Broadway, suited 9X, the suited wheel aces, pocket 6s are better, ace king, ace queen, ace jack, king queen. I'm not using a flat range. Now when the cutoff goes ahead and 4-bets us, we're going to continue. Against the GTO type solver-based opponent, we'd go ahead and just get this all in. Against the regs that 4-bet a bit tighter, we're going to go ahead and actually flat this. We'd trap our aces, flat some pairs like queens through 10s or 9s, and a couple of suited broadways would also be calls like ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen. And now he donks into us after the 3-bet, so we're going to go ahead and flat call that. Against the ISO and the 3-bet, I think I really only want to be stacking off with queens or better down here. The question is, if I can 4-bet small. The queen hands with that ace turn, I'm just going to go ahead and check back. I'm not really scared of turns or river cards. I'm not sure what to do in this spot down here. Could maybe cold 4-bet jacks to fold as part of my bluffing range. I'm not sure if I want to jam over the top or 4-bet small. I'm going to check back here after he donks into me. I'm not going to try to get him to fold better, not going to try to get value from worse. And against that 3x open and the small blind call, I'm going to be continuing with the 8s. And I think I can go ahead and squeeze. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and flat. You could go either way on that to try to squeeze, isolate against the short stack, and try to get him to stick the money in pre-flop. I wouldn't hate that play either. Given the sizings, I was going to treat my raises more like cold 4-bets and, maybe raise 10s or better to stack off with some suited Broadway type hands and ace-queen offsuit as bluffs. Middling pair like 8s, or not middling pair, but a mid pair is probably going to play just fine as a call as well. Opened ace-5 suited in middle position from the cutoff on the upper right-hand table. I'm going to open ace-king offsuit from the button on the upper left-hand table. Both are very standard opens. Lower right-hand table, we're going to go ahead and bet small with our gut shot and 2 overcards on queen 10-8. Against the in-position 3-bet, we're just going to go ahead and muck pocket 2s. We're going to be very tight against those in-position 3-bets, as it's hard to play 3-bet pots out of position. Going to be 4-betting and stacking off pretty aggressively, queens plus ace-king at minimum, get jacks and maybe even 10s in there at some spot as well, and some 4-bet bluffs with good removal that we can't continue, usually ace-queen off. Lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and range bet the ace-king-6, range bet it small against the big blind caller. Now when the turn comes, he shouldn't have any aces or kings or any ace-king. He could have some combos of pocket 7s, some combos of pocket 6, but some 7s are folded pre-flop, some 6s are raised on the flop. Some of those hands 3-bet pre-flop as well. Long story short, I'm going to go ahead and overbet because I've got all the nut-type hands here. I could also do this with ace-queen, ace-jack, maybe ace-10. Upper right-hand table, I'm going to defend the blind on blind open with the king 10 offsuit. I could be overbetting hands like 8-9, 8-5. Some of my queen jack, queen 10, jack 10, but not all of them. Check some back, bet the others. On the river, I'm just going to go ahead here. I'm just going to jam and put his ace-x or any kind of two-pair hands in a tough spot. I'm going to be polarized. Ace-king is probably about my worst value hand. Maybe ace-6 or ace-7 could be in here like this, along with my kings, 6s, and 7s. On the upper right-hand table, we're going to stab half pot with our top pair against the guy who checked in the blind on blind situation. That lower right-hand table, I can use some of my whiff draws as my river overbet bluffs. I would probably use the ace-queen, or I'm sorry, the queen-jack, queen-10, jack-10. I'd pick from those particular combos as his best one-pair bluff catchers are going to be hands like ace-queen, ace-jack, ace-10. So I want to remove from those. He also should have less combos of the gut shots that check called the flop and the turn overbet, where he's more likely to have. Well, I guess he wouldn't really have the open-ended straight draws in his range either, as played. So I guess not blocking the straight draws that are auto folds isn't as significant there in that river, given that action. But blocking his one-pair bluff catchers like ace-queen, ace-jack, ace-10, his best one-pair ace hands, I think is probably the next most important thing to consider. Lower right-hand table, rather, we check the blind in against a limper and the small blind completer with the 7-4 suited, and we're going to check our range on the 7-4 deuce board. I like to check my range very heavily when I either call to the big blind or check in from the big blind. Now, it appears to be a recreational player based on his shorter stack and his pre-flop limp goes and he bets 2 into about 2.85 blinds on the flop. We've got top 2. No reason to do anything but go ahead and check raise him here and start putting more money in on this board with this hand. He goes ahead and quickly calls. We get a great card for us on the turn as we have filled up. A lot of cards are not great for this particular hand as they complete straights or flushes or maybe make some better two pairs. However, that card is brilliant for us. We're going to go ahead and keep betting against the recreational player. Hope he's got a 4. Hope he's got a flush draw that's dead. Hope he gets too sticky with a 7 or some other kind of pocket pair. So we're going to bet 2/3 on that flop. It's a pretty standard size after playing a flop check raise for me, absent a very odd stack size or stack pot ratio on the turn. If he calls, it's going to be a 37 blind pot with about 63 behind, a little less than 2x river. So we're probably just going to be jamming most rivers all in if he continues. He does not. When I've got strong hands like that, especially against a fish, I want to give them a chance to get too sticky with something they should have and start paying me off. Facing a 2.5x open from the button, 3-bet and ace-queen from the big blind is a pretty standard play, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And on the 9-10 deuce rainbow, we're going to go ahead and continuation bet our range for a small size. Lower left-hand table, we're going to open 8-7 suited from the button. And in the small blind with ace-10 opposite, we're going to go ahead and fold to the button 3x open. Some players might 3-bet that. I usually err on the side of folding, but 3-betting is probably pretty close. The guys also look like he'd been a bit on the tighter side, which would make me slant even more towards folding it. Lower left-hand table, we get 3-bet about 4x from the small blind. 8-7 suited is a fine hand to defend with and continue. On the turn, when we turn the ace, I actually want to go ahead and let me see here. I want to keep betting my ace-king, my 10s, my 9s, my deuces. I wouldn't have deuces. We're going to go ahead and fold without too much in the way of backdoor draws. I'm going to go ahead and keep betting this. We're going to bet, let's see, we're going to bet about 2/3. Look to get him get too sticky and not believe that I hold the ace. Sets us up for a river slight overbet jam on a lot of cards. I think the ace is probably the best card for us. After that, a queen. I could keep barreling with a hand like Jack-10, a hand like Queen-Jack, some of my King-Queen, King-Jack type hands. I don't think I would have 7-8, so I'd mostly be betting my open-ended straight draws and my high gut shots. We'll fold ace deuce from the cutoff, but we'll open king king from the button in the upper right hand table. We get 3-bet by a player who might already be sick of our shit. We're a bit deeper, but not so deep that we're really worried about kings being beat, especially in a button versus small blind spot. When we face a 4x 3-bet from the small blind when we're on the button, what I typically am going to do in that spot, at least against regs, is I'm going to 4-bet queens plus ace king for value. Here I might actually go a bit tighter and just do kings plus ace king suited and put my ace king off and my queens and my call and my trap range because we're deeper. Kings plus, I think I still going to want to 4-bet, and some of my ace king as well, so usually ace king suited would do that. And we'd mix in a few bluffs. I'd probably use ace jack offsuit as my bluff. I could probably call ace queen offsuit in position in that particular spot. Face a blind on blind open with ace-3 offsuit. I typically continue with all my aces in this spot. I'll 3-bet a couple of offsuit aces as bluffs. Ace-3 and ace-deuce are a couple good ones to do that with. Upper left-hand table, we have a blind battle. We're going to go ahead and defend with the 4-deuce suited. And we're going to fold with little to no backdoor equity against that continuation bet in the blind on blind spot. Got a smaller than typical open, a 2.2x open from the button over here on the lower right-hand table. We can defend a bit wider. I mean, king 10 is going to be a defense either way in this particular position, but it's certainly a defense when the sizing gets a bit smaller. So we're going to go ahead and call and check range out of position to him. We can fold 10-5 off in the blind battle. That hand is just too weak to really get involved. And feels awfully weak to fold a hand as good as king high on this particular board, but I just don't have a lot in the way of backdoor equity, so I'm going to go ahead and fold a ton of my range there. I'm not folding any ace-x, any 9x. I'm going to pretty much continue all my pairs as well. King high, I'll let go. Got a 2.5x open from a player in position on the button. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet that from the big blind. That's fairly standard, even though we've already been active, and I think he's not going to give us nearly as much credit as we might otherwise be receiving. Hand's just too strong to do anything but 3-bet. Lower right-hand table, we've got a cutoff open, a button flat. We're in the small blind. We're going to squeeze with a very similar range as to what we would just 3-bet with without the cold collar. King 10 suited is clearly in there. I'm going to use roughly a 10 or 11% range for that. King 10 suited is clearly in that range. We're going to fold everything that we're not 3-betting. I guess you could talk me into maybe flatten a couple of small pairs, not good enough to squeeze with, especially with the big blind being fishy and probably not being prone to be real aggressive as well, but that's a deviation from what's standard. Small blind is largely a 3-bet or fold spot. And with the upper right-hand table breaking, we're going to go ahead and sit that one out in just a moment here too. We'll play our button one more time now. We'll open the king-queen offsuit. Got a king-jack 5 flop, two-tone. We're going to range bet this if he checks to us, range bet it small. He checks, so we go ahead and put in our small range bet, about a third or 30 or so % of the pot. He calls me. On this particular turn, we can have kings, jack, sixes, fives. King jack, king 6 suited, king 5 suited, 5 6 suited, ace king, aces, king queen. He can really not have kings or jacks from the pre-flop action. He shouldn't have fives as well, or king, queen, both suited or offsuit from the flop action. Those should be check raised at a high frequency. We have lots of strong hands that want to get a lot of money in. We're going to go ahead and overbet this turn. Ace king, king queen, king 10 are probably right around where we cut that. I think those hands would be in the overbet range, and other than that, weaker kings, we would start checking back. We could be overbet bluffing with our 7-8. If we've got 4-7 suited, we can do that. Queen 10 suited, and then some of the gut shots as well around the Broadway type hands, or some of the gut shots like 8-9. This table broke, so we're out of there. Upper left-hand table, we open kings from middle position. We get called in position by I think it's safe to call him a recreational player who's playing 59 over 22 hands. Okay, we actually get squeezed, which is a wonderful result for us with our particular hand by the small blind. He's a little bit shorter, but otherwise seems to be a regular type player. That might have just been from a previous hand. I believe we can still 4-bet small or fold. I am going to use queens plus ace king as my 4-bet stack off range, and I'm going to 4-bet bluff with ace queen offsuit here. I'll probably call a few hands like ace queen suited, 10s, 9s, maybe ace jack king queen suited, but with the squeeze and a player behind me still to act, I'm going to cold call a lot less than I otherwise would, even though that we're in position from the squeezer, as we don't close the action, or he might call us and take a flop where we're not in position as well. So I'm going to get a lot tighter with my cold calls. But I'm going to be a bit more liberal with my 4-bets. A lot of times in position, I'll take a hand like ace king offsuit or queens and just flat. I don't want to flat those hands and give this player over here, the player in position, a chance to come along as well in position and realize some equity. So I'm going to 4-bet a bit wider, and I'm going to cold call a lot less. Kings, of course, is just going to be a 4-bet and get it in no matter what type situation, though. Getting under the gun limp. Everyone else folds, including the small blind. We're going to go ahead and isolate that, or not really isolate because no one's left, but raise up that recreational player with a fairly tight range from the blinds, but ace-queen suited is clearly good enough to do that with. On 8-6-6 two-tone, we're going to go ahead and range bet. And with the flush draw, we'd be betting anyway, even if it wasn't a range bet situation. Open ace-9 off from the button. When we get 3-bet, though, that's a pretty easy muck. The fishy player's been loose, and the big blind's been reasonably aggressive stats so far. I'm not going to expand my range and open that hand, but it's reasonably close. I wouldn't hate it if you wanted to. Over here against the cutoff open on the button, we're going to go ahead and re-raise fairly aggressively, including the 10-9 suited. Upper left table, we're going to open king-jack from middle position. Can fold Jack 5 on the button. 10-7 suited is a little too loose to open from middle position. Small blind's going to be a 3-bet or fold spot against the button open. Queen 8 suited is just a little too loose. We've got better options to use than that. Blind on blind, we face a 3x open. Jack 7 suited is probably a little outside the defense range. It's close. I don't have any reason to think this guy is particularly aggressive blind on blind, more so than a typical reg or solver would be, so I'm just going to go ahead and fold it, but it is pretty close. Open Queen Jack in the upper right-hand table in a blind v blind situation. When we get 3-bet by the blind, by the big blind, blind on blind, I can just go ahead and fold Jack Queen. How you play that situation probably is very dependent on the big blind's tendencies, which obviously can be tricky to know on Bovada, or Bovada rather. That said, when you face a 3x 3-bet in that blind on blind spot, I'm going to go ahead and open loose from the button on the lower left-hand table with 10-4 suited. The blinds have been reasonably tight and passive overall so far. And I'm probably not calling with too many offsuit hands when I get 3-bet in that blind on blind spot. Maybe a little bit of ace-queen, although that could be a 4-bet bluff in a lot of spots as well. But Queen-Jack is something that should just be folded. Lower left-hand table did not work out. Got 3-bet by the small blind, cold 4-bet by the big blind, and a trivial fold with 10-4. Can open Jack 5 suited from the button in the upper right-hand table. Go ahead and use our small bet in position on Queen Jack 5 two-tone. Be checking back almost all turns. I guess Jacks and 5s would be two kinds of cards where we improved. The trips or 2-pair where we'd be betting a lot more. Other than that, though, we'll be checking back with our marginal pair with perhaps some showdown value. We will open 9-8 suited from the button in the upper left-hand table. A tight Well, middle position actually, but a tight middle position player opens. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet tens. Because he's so tight, I'm going to treat him more like an under-the-gun open, but we are still going to put tens in our 3-bet range. I've really not flattened very much ever anything from the cutoff, so it's 3-bet or fold. 3-betting about 8.5% of hands. Pocket 10 should be in there. Probably nines are better, ace-queen, ace-king, king-queen. And then for suited cards, ace-10, king-10, queen-jack are better, and a couple of suited wheel aces should get you about where you want to be. Since this guy is so tight, if you go a little bit tighter than that, maybe dump the wheel aces or queen-jack, king-10, ace-10, some of those type hands, I wouldn't have a problem with it. He checks to us. We're going to go ahead and range bet on ace-8-4 two-tone, with tens checking back the turn for the most part, without having hit the set, of course. Under the gun opens to 3x. Ace-jack is usually a bit outside my 3-bet range from under the gun opener, but this guy has been so active and aggressive thus far, I'm actually going to expand and play a bit more hands and 3-bet him here. If you fold it, I don't mind it as well, just don't flat. Don't really flat anything in that spot middle position against an under the gun opener. It's going to be too hard to play post-flop. Your range will play a lot easier. You'll give up almost no EV compared to a mixed solution from playing 3-bet or fold. And when I say I'm expanding my range because that guy seems a bit looser under the gun, I'm really only throwing in a few more hands, probably throwing ace-jack off and a couple of suited Broadway cards I might not usually 3-bet, maybe like queen-10 and jack-10 might not normally be in there against an under-the-gun opener, and I would throw those in. You're going from like 8.5% standard 3-bet to more like a 10% 3-bet there. So not real drastic, just an ever so slight shift to be more aggressive because the player's range is wider. And if his range is wider, you can 3-bet wider. Blind on blind, 10-9 suited is a very standard open, so we go ahead and do that. We get called by a recreational player. I'm going to check range to him out of position. Lower left-hand table, we're going to open 8s in the blind on blind spot. We're going to go ahead and just sort of probe the turn small out of position. Lower left-hand table, we're going to check the range. We're going to fold against the raise and re-raise from button small blind, the upper left-hand table. And let's see here. We actually have a smidge of showdown value. I'd rather check this down than try to bluff with it or try to value bet it. I'm going to go ahead and jab at the turn small also with the 8s on the lower left-hand table. I'm going to look at some MDA here from a recreational fish type player. I'm going to fold against that small raise with the 8s. I'd be calling all my ace-X. Recreational player, blind on blind, is the pre-flop caller. He bets about a little more than 40%, about a half pot bet. That's pretty overbluffed in general. His check call bet line less so, but not enough to make a huge difference. I think I'm going to go ahead and call. I'm beat an awful lot here, but I'm still going to go ahead and call it. Price is too good. His bluff tendencies are a bit too good. He had the Broadway, or he made that gut shot, the Broadway, but he made that straight off his gut shot. He probably should have betted bigger. Upper left-hand table, 6s against a cutoff open is a pretty standard 3-bet for me from the button. However, it is pretty close towards the bottom of the range. We got away with it. It worked. Folding 3s against that 6x open. We're going to call. King-9 blind on blind against a small blind open. And with no heart, no pair, we're going to fold to the half-pot bet in that upper right-hand table. When we get 3-bet with King-9 in the lower right-hand table, we go ahead and fold that as well. We want to be continuing with pairs and cards that play better. Cards that have better implied odds, essentially. Cards that can make stronger hands. Suited cards, connected cards. It was a 4.5x re-steal, and I think the small blind was in there as well, so I'm going to get a bit tighter when I'm calling. But I'm still going to call a decent bet because I'm going to have position there with the button. Going to open ace-7 suited from middle position, the lower right-hand table. And a recreational player min re-raises me, so we're going to go ahead and call until we get the small blind cold 4-bet, at which point we get out of the way. I don't think I'm calling anything in this particular spot. I also don't even think I'm 4-betting small. I think I'm just going to play a jam or fold range, and it's probably just going to be as tight as queens plus ace king. Ace 7, nothing to do but fold here given that action. Big blind calls me. We're going to go ahead and range bet small on the ace 10 jack two-tone board. Probably not going to put too much more money into that pot at any point unless we find our third 7. 3x open from the button, our big blind. We should probably not be defending with king 8. However, it is pretty close. I think that would defend king 9 or better. We'll open 8s from middle position on the upper right-hand table. We're going to open kings from the button in the upper left-hand table. Now the pocket 8 hand, we're facing a 3-bet in position where we're already going to be very tight against that, and he's 4xing us in position, which makes us far less inclined to call, but a bit more incentivized to 4-bet. I'd normally be 4-betting queens plus ace king here to stack off, and probably ace queen offsuit as a bluff. Truth be told, even against a 3.5x open, I'm probably not calling pocket 8s anyway. Against the 4x open, I'm not going to do it either. I guess the only real interesting point here is what do I call? Against the 3.5x open, I'm probably defending with a call with hands like ace queen, king queen suited, jacks and 10s. I dump king queen suited for sure against this larger size. Jacks I could either jam or call. 10s are kind of a rubber hand. I could go any direction with 10s. I think ace queen suited could still be a call, or you might talk me into 4-bet jamming that as well. But I think jacks I might go ahead and 4-bet. 8s is going to just be a fold against that though. Lower left-hand table, we've got jack 7 suited in the cutoff. We're going to go ahead and open that. It's towards the bottom of our range. Lower right-hand table against a pot-sized bet, we're going to fold on the 5-5-2 with no real equity except some overcards. Against a small bet, that becomes more a curious question. If he bets like 1/3, I may have to just start calling with all kinds of weird random overcards. That may be a spot where you randomize or call with some backdoor flush draw type hands and fold without. Against the pot-sized bet, I can be a lot more discriminating. I can safely fold a much higher percentage of my range, and I've got no problem folding a naked queen 10 with no real backdoors at that point. Against the bet and the overcall, I'm going to go ahead and fold. Against just one player, I was considering calling with second pair and that backdoor flush draw. The board's already that coordinated. I don't really have anything that helps me draw to the straight, so I'm inclined to get out earlier as opposed to later. With the other player in there calling, I think it just to chews up more of my equity. There's more hands are going to outdraw me if I'm already ahead. More hands could already be beating me. My kicker's not that good. All I beat currently are draws, or, I don't really beat an even second pair. I just beat the jack. So I think it's okay to be a bit nitty and go ahead and fold, even though we do have a pair. But these limp pots are very unclear for how it should be played, because you shouldn't be in limp pots in the first place very often. The big blind has been reasonably aggressive, so no reason to open wider. The recreational player in the small blind hasn't been aggressive, but he has been loose. I don't have as much fold equity as I'd like, so I'm not going to go ahead and expand my range and open that hand. Small blind facing a middle, or under the gun open rather. I'm going to play 3-bet or fold. I don't have too many weak suited aces, but I will throw one of them in there. I'll 3-bet ace-5 suited as my best wheel ace as a 3-bet. Only 3-betting about 7.5% of hands right there, but you can throw ace-5 suited in there. Lower right-hand table, we open with ace-king in the cutoff. Upper right-hand table, we get called. We're going to go ahead and range bet small on the king 10-7 board. We got an overcard to turn a pair. We could turn some gut shots to Broadway on a queen or a jack, and of course the spades give us the nut flush draw. So there is some ways we can still get out of this hand if he calls us. Multi-way, out of position, the lower right-hand table, we're going to check range. We have top pair, top kicker on ace-7-5. We get flatted. I continue betting with my diamond draws, especially the diamond combo draws. I guess all my diamond draws are diamond combo draws, ace-queen, ace-jack, or queen-jack. I'm going to bet all my queen-jack open-enders. I can keep betting my pocket tens. I can keep betting my ace-king and my king-queen. I would check, or actually I think I would check king-queen. I would be betting king-10. I'm going to go ahead and flat this down here, but I'm going to check the ace-5 as there's just not a whole lot of equity going on. I can bluff the river if it checks back and try to move him off a hand like queens or jacks, 10-jack, 10-queen. Against the call bet, I'm just going to go ahead and fold. I could have hands like queen-jack, king-queen that can go into a check-call line. I probably am betting most of my ace-king, but perhaps not all of it, so I could check-call some of that as well. And I, of course, would have kings as a trap. This player, he checks to me now. This is a very weird line where it was a small bet by the in-position rec. He made a small raise. I think he's got a much larger percentage of like ace-queen, ace-jack, ace-10 than hands that I'm worried about, you know, two pairs, 5s or 7s. I'm going to go ahead and bet my ace-king, see what he does. I'm going to fold the king-8 suited under the gun. I'm going to limp in after the one limper from the small blind with 7-10 suited in the upper left-hand table. I guess I could also check back the river and look to, you know, bluff catch or catch him value betting worse or induce a call from a worse hand that doesn't want to go 3 streets but doesn't believe my weird action. I guess that would be the only other option once I get to the turn like that. The flop is also very weird in that hand. I'm not sure what to do when there's a raise and a re-raise. I probably shouldn't be calling too often, but cold re-raising that hand after the bet and the raise seems a bit like overplaying it as well. Weird hand. I'm not sure what to do. Face a min bet with second pair. We're going to go ahead and call that. Ace is not a great turn card, as he could have an ace. His straight draws now either have a pair with an ace or they made the straight itself. I'm just going to go ahead and look for the showdown or maybe snap off a bluff, depending on his sizing and my read. But that little min bet on the flop doesn't exactly scream strength, especially after he limped pre-flop. And in fact, we want to go ahead and tag him as a recreational player. Tag this guy as a rec also for limping under the gun in the lower left-hand table. We'll check our range after checking into the big blind. Check to this player, see what he does. With top pair, we're not just going to go ahead and give him credit for having us beat, so we're going to check call at least once. Not a great card as it coordinates with his weaker hands that could have legitimately bet the turn. I'll probably fold to a large bet, but against a small bet, now I'm feeling pretty good about my hand, getting to showdown, so I'm going to go ahead and check call it again. And check to him on the river, and we're chopping against another weak ace. Upper left-hand table, queen 10 suited is a standard under the gun open, so we raise it first in. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind, ace-6 offsuit is a standard open. We're going to go ahead and open and get into this pot with the rec. Although king-jack-9 is not a good board for our hand, we're going to go ahead and check range. We're going to defend the under-the-gun open from the big blind with 3 as the upper left-hand table. We're going to go ahead and defend the big blind against the middle position open, the lower right-hand table with ace-4 suited. We're going to go ahead and start jabbing at this pot in the blind-on-blind situation and check range with the 3s. We're now going to go ahead and try to move this guy off the pot on the river with an overbet. He just has not shown any sign of strength as of yet, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And we could actually have some strong hands here. Against that real small flop bet, and we're not even, we actually beat, we're not, normally pocket threes are beneath 3 different possible pairs on the flop. With a deuce out there, there's one less card that beats us. Small flop bet, we block ace-10. We've got some backdoor gut shots, backdoor flush draws. We're going to go ahead and check raise that. We're going to defend with the queen-jack and the blind on blind. We're going to keep checking with the pocket threes. And we're going to re-raise the cutoff open with pocket nines on the button. We're going to check back our middle pair in the blind battle there with king-jack in the upper right-hand table. I can have 10-8, 8s, 5s. That's a good card for me as I pick up equity, and it probably scares a lot of his range as well, a lot of his middling one-pair hands that call the flop. So we're going to go ahead and keep betting this. We're going to go ahead and bet the king-jack on the turn to protect it. Now a lot more cards could outdraw us. The fish cold calls the 3-bet, then bets half pot with only another half, with only half his stack. We've got the overpair. There's nothing to do but just get this in. If he's trapped with a higher pair, more power to him. And he's got king-jack for overcards. We get it in. We're pretty happy about that. Our hand ends up being good. Let me see here. I would love when they go bet call call. That's a spot where bluffing the river is actually a lot more marginal than most. He could easily have hearts in his range that we're calling twice. I don't have a heart blocker. I'm going to go ahead and surrender this. I was thinking about getting wacky on a total blank river right there. Given that he could just be, I could just be running right into hearts so easily. I don't want to do that. If I happen to have a big heart in my hand, I guess a hand like ace-jack with the ace of hearts could, in theory, have been in my flop check raise range as a bluff, and I could have kept betting it on that particular turn, having picked up the gut shot. So I think I could actually have a hand like ace-jack or maybe even ace-queen might have been a bluff. Some of those might have been flatted. But regardless, if I'm looking to bluff this river, I want to have a heart here, and this is a spot where I don't mind surrendering nearly as bad as most, just because the bet call line is not overfolded nearly as drastically as so many other spots by the player pool. So I don't surrender rivers too often, but here's a spot caught live on camera on film of me actually doing that. So don't say it never happens. It will happen on occasion, and I think this is a spot that justifies it. He goes all in. Either he's bluffing or he backed it to the hearts. I don't know which, but with ace high, I sure don't care. I'm just going to fold and let him have it. Happy the way with that hand played out so far. I think the flop check raise bluff is reasonable. I think continuing once we pick up that nut flush draw and there's that king overcard that can scare a lot of his marginal one pair hands that call the flop. I think that's very, very reasonable right there. And I think surrendering without the blockers when a very reasonable nut draw he could have comes in is also A-OK, especially given the pool's tendencies to not necessarily overfold as drastically in that spot as they do pretty much all over the game tree in other lines. So I'm okay with how that hand played. $2.5x open from the button. We can go ahead and defend our big blind with Jack-10. Player seems reggish. We don't know very much about him as of yet after one orbit, but no limps. He's mostly been raising pre-flop. I'm going to go ahead and check my second pair along with that heart blocker, or I'm sorry, club blocker. I can call a lot of club rivers as well if I'm so inclined. I'm not so much trying to get him to call with worse hands. I'm not trying to get him to fold a king. This hand is right smack in the range of hands I don't mind checking to check call. Now that he checks twice, I think I've really just got to go ahead and try to get some value, especially with that king pairing up where he's not too likely to have it. Ace high, pocket 8, 7x, even a hand like pocket 4s or ace 3 might still call me. I want to get some value here, so that's what we're going to try. Under the gun open, pocket 8s is a bit on the loose side to 3-bet, so I'm just going to go ahead and fold it. We're going to open 7s under the gun in the upper left-hand table. I don't really flat even on the button against a 3x open, which is why I didn't call with my 8s right there. But if you are going to have flats on your button, pocket 8s is the exact kind of hand that you want to do it with. I just opt to keep my ranges a bit simpler and keep my game tree from splitting into too many spots too early, so I mostly play 3-bet or fold pre-flop when I'm not in the big blind, even on the button. You're not giving up all that much EV, especially in these relatively lower stakes games with relatively higher amounts of rake, to go ahead and not have any flat calls, especially against the larger opens. Against min raises or 2.5x type things, it gets a bit closer. Against the 3x, I'm content to just 3-bet or fold. To whatever extent I'm giving up EV, it's not a ton. It's probably pretty close. And like I said, it does keep my range simpler and easier to play. Small blind against a limp and an isolation. That's going to be a 3-bet or fold spot, like most pre-flop spots. The isolations should be tighter against a limp than in a non-open pot, and the pool stats show me that they in fact are tighter. I effectively would treat this more like he was opening from the cutoff and 3-bet accordingly. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold that, as Ace-10 is not going to be in any kind of 3-bet range for me against a cutoff open. Against the button, it's a bit closer, but I still would probably fold that as well. Lower left-hand table, I check range out of position. I'm going to go ahead and jab at that particular pot, though, after the flop checks through, just because I don't want to let him hit a fourth spade easily or fourth club rather easily for free. Now my hand doesn't really have showdown value, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it into a bluff. And I like to use a pot size bet on these 4 straight or 4 flush boards. I think there's more value in bluffing this than try to showdown my fourth pair on a 4 flush board. I can fold out some 9x, or I'm sorry, my third pair. I can fold out some 9x type hands, some queen x without clubs, maybe even some weak clubs. Not the weak club from that particular player, but I still think that's better than trying to show it down or get into some check call bluff catching games. We're going to open Jack-9 of spades from under the gun in the upper right-hand table. We get called by the big blind. We face an ace-10-9 two-tone flop. We're going to go ahead and range bet that. Checking back most turns unless we hit a 9 or perhaps a jack. Even picking up the spades, I think that's the kind of hand that we're going to like to check back on the turn. So we'll be betting some backdoor flush draws and checking others. And the hand with some showdown value like the 9x is probably a better candidate for the check backs should we turn a spade. Now we face the check raise. It's a fairly decent-sized check raise, but he's also a fairly aggressive player. Given that we've got a pair and a backdoor flush draw, I think that's a good hand to continue with and evaluate on the turn. You also have backdoor straight draws as well. I will fold, though, to a barrel on that particular card. We didn't pick up more equity. We don't block 7-8, which is a reasonable flop check raise bluff that now got there. He could have 9s or 10s that didn't 3-bet pre-flop, at least in some frequency, or could have a hand like ace-10, ace-9. Lower right-hand table, middle position open is going to get 3-bet from our button with our ace-jack offsuit. About a 10% 3-bet range. Ace-jack towards the bottom of that. And now the question is, do I want to start bluffing with this hand? I don't really have 7-8. I've got 9s, 10s, aces, ace-10, ace-9, ace-10 offsuit and suited, ace-9 suited. I guess I could have some ace-6 suited as well that called the flop check raise. I could be bluffing with some diamond draws and some straight draws. I think I'm going to go ahead and check this as it's got a smidge of the showdown value. I beat those Broadway straight draws, and I beat some diamond draws. I'm just going to take my showdown. Yeah, and I was against a straight draw. Honestly, if I were him, that would have been a great card to continue barreling on the turn. We've still got the open-ended straight draw. We also blocked the nuts that came in. I shouldn't have many combos of 7-8 under the gun, but some players will. And you holding the 8 blocks those combos. You know, and he could even be repping the nuts, which are very legitimately in his range. If I were him, I wouldn't have minded him continuing to barrel and even barreling off that river. And that's an example of me saying that my hand has a smidge of showdown value and actually manifesting just by taking my check downs and checking down my pair and winning. So even though it's not a ton, you do run into it sometimes. And if you've got to check back some hands and bluff with others, you want to check back the hands that will occasionally win its showdown value, whereas, you know, a small diamond draw will never win its showdown value. You know, a hand like Queen-Jack, King-Queen shouldn't win its showdown very often, though that particular time they would have as well. Check range out of position against the recreational player on Jack 10-5. He goes ahead and bets pot. We're slow walking him with our overpair. Given that this player seems fishy and aggressive, I would often just play this more reserved and go into some check calls. However, I don't really like a lot of cards with this hand. I want to start putting money in quickly when my hand still feels strong. I'm going to use the check raise here. He could have Jack 10, some combination of Jacks and 10s. He could have 5s. He could have a lot of hands like straight draws, flush draws, you know, Ace-Jack. Not so much King-Jack because I block it, but Queen-Jack, pairs of Jacks that continue as long. The 5 is a pretty good card for me, and I don't think he's going to really bet call for pot with too many 5x hands, except for 5-5, which now is less likely to be in his range, as now there's only one combo as opposed to 3. I'm going to go ahead and keep betting here. I now beat 10-Jack as well. I'm going to go ahead and bet about 2/3 and set myself up for about a 2/3 river jam. We're going to open blind on blind with ace-3. That one's a little marginal, but the player is fishy and not aggressive, so we can go ahead and do that and check range to him on the lower right-hand table. Going to check call with the bottom pair. I'm not sure what's going on this lower left-hand table, if my connection is crapping out or something. We're going to keep checking with our 3 and try to show this down. Okay, and that's a nice, pretty blank river for us. You know, no flushes completed, no straights completed. And also that means I could be perceived as having those bluffs in my range. We're going to go ahead and jam the kings all in here, try to get heroed by Jack 10, Jack X, hope he doesn't have a 5 or some kind of boat. Instantly calls, and he is beat, so we stacked off. So that, you know, kings on the flop is kind of close if you want to put that into a check call or check raise range after checking your range on the flop. And given that the guy was fishy and I thought he could probably start stacking off later was the primary reason for doing that. And that's an example of a deviation getting us a stack right there. I pulled up his hand before he quit the table on us, rage quit from getting stacked, and he had Jack 9, so he just called us down with any Jack at that point. So my idea that he could have Jacks that are kind of middling and take them too far and pay me off turned out to be correct, as that's exactly what happened right there. I'll occasionally run into like 10s that didn't raise pre-flop, or you combo a pocket 5, some weird 5x hand that overplayed its hand on the flop and got lucky. But I'm also going to get value from all kinds of Jack X that really is just going to be only bluff catching at that point. So I think I'm pretty happy about it. I'm certainly happy about the result. I think the way I play that hand is pretty good. The sizing conventions were pretty good too to set us up for appropriate size bets on the turn and the river. I went roughly geometric growth a pot, where I used a roughly 70-ish% bet on both the turn and the river. Not perfectly, but close enough. Blind on blind, upper right-hand table, ace-queen offsuit's a very standard open, so we go ahead and raise it. Lower left-hand table, jack-9 suited is a standard open on the button. This player is almost certainly a wreck. Button against the cutoff open. Ace-8 suited is a bit outside of my standard range for 3-betting. I've been aggressive on the table as well. I'm not going to go ahead and expand any further. Lower left-hand table, I'll range bet on the King-Jack-8. King-Jack-8 rainbow. We get check called. The turn is a 3. On that particular board in the lower left-hand table, I can have kings, 8, jacks. I can also have 3s that would have been part of a range bet. I can have king-jack. I can have king-8, both suited and offsuit. I can have jack-8 suited, maybe some jack-8 off. I can have king-3 suited. I can have aces, ace-king, king-queen. He can't have a lot of these hands based on pre-flop and flop action. So I'm going to use overbets as opposed to small-size bets. I mean, this is trivia for how I play the range overall. In this particular scenario, the jack is going to be checked back one way or the other. It's going to be a reasonable bluff-catching type hand, or perhaps even value betting the river against the second check. He's been pretty loose. I mean, I'm not so sure if he calls with worse jacks, but he might call with 10s or 9s that didn't 3-bet pre-flop, some 8x. I'd like to be as aggressive as possible with my value betting, so I'm going to go ahead and try to value bet this jack. I'll value cut myself some against a better jack or a trapped king, or whatever, hands that beat me. But you're supposed to value cut yourself some of the time, or you're not value betting nearly often enough. And it also makes your bluffs, it justifies your bluffs. It allows you to not be as on balance with all the bluffs I'm going to have in my range right there. And players don't really check raise bluff the river enough, much less, or they don't check raise the river enough, period, much less check raise bluff the river often enough. So I'm not going to be punished for going to thin value nearly often enough to make me not want to do it. I think that all boils down to trying to get value out of that jack and just let him call me with something stupid. We can open king-10 suited from under the gun, the lower left-hand table. This upper right-hand table does not seem very wreck-infested, so we're going to go ahead and move that one along. The upper left-hand table, we can go ahead and tag another wreck. 8-9-6 two-tone, we're going to go ahead and bet small. I don't think that's solver approved, but it makes my life easier, and they don't seem to punish me for it, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's probably a spot where you larger bet or check more so, but if guys aren't punishing me, I'm not going to deviate until they start doing it. Let's see here. I'm content that these two players in the upper left-hand table, seat 1 and 5, are Rex based on their very wide VPIPs so far and some limps from seat 5. Lower left-hand table, I've got a rec to my immediate left. If we lose him, we'll ditch the table as everybody else seems like a reg. In the lower left-hand table, we stacked the one rec. Unsure about the new players to the left of me, but they don't necessarily seem like recs. We're going to go ahead and shift those two out and look for a couple new ones. We'll raise King 8 suited in the lower right-hand table from middle position. In the new table, we see a short stack to the left and to the right. That's very promising, so we're going to be happy about playing a few orbers to see how the players seem to be playing over there. Lower left-hand table, a player's been tight in the small blind and at least passive in the big blind. We're going to go ahead and just expand our range with the 6-8 offsuit. It's a pretty far expansion, but I think I'm going to get away with it an awful lot. That is not a standard open, but it's a deviation based on the players not seeming aggressive. No sooner do I say it than do I get embarrassed from a 3-bet from a small blind that hasn't played a hand yet, so we're going to go ahead and muck. Lower left-hand table, we've got a small gut shot. A player is behind us. We have a spade, but it's not too meaningful as a backdoor spade when it's that low. Neither players are deep. The gut shot's not to the nuts. I'm just going to go ahead and fold that. It's probably pretty close, but with the player trapped behind me, you know, I can certainly have much higher gut shots like Jack 8, Jack 9 in my open-ended straight draws. Plenty of other pairs or flush draws to continue. I'm not worried about being exploited by a short-stacked rec player. And there's just not that much reward for me if I do, in fact, hit my gutter ball. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but it seems reasonable to me. Small blind against the middle position open. Ace-9 suited is probably a little bit too weak to go ahead and 3-bet, at least as a standard. So we're going to muck it. And we'll go ahead and give this player a rec tag based on his limp and his short stack. .2x open. Got this small tight open over here on the button. It's not a typical open size you see. However, even though we do get a bit looser with our defense against that open size, I think King 4 off is still just too marginal to come along with, and I also don't even think it's that close. Against a solver 2.25x big blind defense range, it should look something like that. So a few more offsuit kings, but still not King 4. It's not a perfect estimate of, not a perfect assumption of what his range is, but it's probably a pretty reasonable estimate. And we'll open King 4 suited in the upper left-hand table from the cutoff. And we're going to open Queen Jack offsuit blind on blind in the lower right-hand table. Queen 10 offsuit's just outside of my standard open range from middle position from the upper left-hand table. If you open hands like that, it's probably not too bad. I probably fold Queen 10, Queen Jack, but come along and raise first in with Queen Jack, King 10, hands like that. Queen 6 suited is a fine standard open from the button in the lower right-hand table. And the lower right-hand table will also open King-Queen offsuit in the cutoff. We get called by a loose, fishy recreational player on the button. He's playing 52-7 over 75 hands with almost no 3-bets, so he's very loose and very passive, at least pre-flop. King-8 suited is kind of a marginal under-the-gun open, the upper left-hand table. I'm going to go ahead and fold it, but if you open it, I also don't have a problem with it. I'm going to check range out of position in the lower right-hand table. Not a great board for our particular hand, or really even for our range. Although we do have the overpairs, we just don't hit too many 4s, 3s, or deuces. Against a min bet, however, I'm calling just to try to hit my overcards or to bluff him in a later street. Now there's 4 to the straight out there. That board seems to scare him. 4 to the straight. We've got king high. We're going to turn that into a bluff for a pot-sized bet. As long as he doesn't have ace-x, I think he's out of here. I could have 5s in my range as played, or even some ace-x. Oh, and he heroed me with king 10. That turned second pair on the river. A very short stack limper in the lower left-hand table in the blind-on-blind spot. You could either isolate or check in. I'm just going to check this one in, but it's pretty close. I usually isolate those guys with roughly my button raise first in range, and I don't always open every offsuit ace. I often muck a couple. Plus, he's short, would rather not start chucking too much money in pre-flop with a hand like ace-3, so I think check-in's okay. And just keep the pot smaller, try to get towards showdown. That double-paired double-paired board, I'm glad to take the showdown with the ace-high as probably being good. You know, if you were to raise that up pre-flop, I don't think that's a big mistake. I think it's probably pretty close either way. Lower left-hand table, we're blind on blind. 10-8 suited would not be a standard open. But we're going to go ahead and expand ever so slightly. It's kind of on the cusp. We're going to fold king-jack in the blind against a limp and an isolation raise. Cutoff open. We're on the button with king-jack offsuit. I would raise ace-jack and king-queen as a fairly standard type play. This player seems a bit on the loose aggressive side. I haven't been too active. I'm going to expand my range ever so slightly and include this combo. This would be not standard, but very close, and some players would do it anyway. If you fold it, I don't mind it, but I think 3-betting's okay there, especially since this player has been a bit on the more active side. Very nice flop for my expanded hand. He checks to me. I'm going to go ahead and range bet small on the king-jack 5 two-tone. He flats. Not the best turn card, actually. We could have kings, queens, jacks, all of which want to bet. I wouldn't have 5s, but I would have kings, queens, jacks. I would have ace-10 suited, and if I'm expanding my range to include king-jack offsuit, I would also have ace-10 offsuit. I can have hands like ace-king, king-10 that have a good pair plus a straight draw. I think I actually would rather bet those. I'm going to under-rep this hand and check it back. And I blocked that heart as well, that heart that hit on the river. So I'm not too worried about calling most bets. I'm also going to try to get a value bet in here if he checks to me, which he does. I'm going to go ahead and bet, your standard size of about 2/3, 70% in that bet check bet line. If you want to triple this off, I don't think it's too bad either. I think it's pretty close between a turn check and turn bet. Oh, I could also have 10-9 suited in that situation on the turn as well, which would, of course, be a bet. So I'm going to be betting my sets, my straights. Trying to think if I really trap too many strong hands. Maybe a couple combos of like ace-10 Ace 10, Ace 10 of hearts is a good hand to trap if I want to mix some traps in there. I could maybe consider trapping kings, although that plays with fire if another heart hits or if the board goes 4 to the straight on an ace, a 10, or a 9. I think ace 10 with 2 hearts, or at least with the ace of hearts, is going to be the best check back traps to under-rep your hand and have strong hands on the river. And we face a real small bet, 2 into 7.6 from a fishy player. We've got 2 overcards and that jack of diamonds. I was going to stab at this if everyone checked to me. I'm just going to go ahead and call that little jabbing probe bet on the turn with my diamond. I think I may even bluff this if it checks to me on the river here. Yeah, and I just don't see very many strong hands in people's range. I'm actually going to go ahead. Well, I'm thinking about overbetting this, but that burns me too much. I'm going to just bluff for a 2/3 type size. Some one pair hands might get sticky, but a lot of them will fold, and a lot of weird random draws are going to fold out. I really only have to fold pairs as I've got ace high, but I don't want to check and let those pairs show down for free. If you want to bluff there with an overbet size, I don't have a big problem with that either. I think if anybody's got a flush, the weak player that led into me doesn't lead so small, then check the river. And I don't believe the imposition player just flats with the flush in that situation, or even some kind of set or full house type hand. If he's got a boat or even trips, I feel like you're going to raise those up as well. So the range is going to be pretty weak with the way we played out. So if you want to overbet to make them fold pretty damn close to 100% of their weak range on that river, yeah, I think I like that too. Plus we have a diamond that blocks some flushes, which if I'm going to overbet, I like having good blockers for my overbets, so that plays into it as well. Lower left-hand table, we open king 9 on the button. We get called by the big blind, and a queen 10-3 two-tone board. We're going to go ahead and range bet. We've got a gut shot. We'll keep betting, not every turn, but a lot of them. The club turn, we've got the club in our range. Let me think. We want to be betting our flushes. We want to be betting our 10s, queens, 4s, and 3s, so all of our sets. I think I'd keep betting queen 10. I'm going to be betting my one pair hands. I'm not sure which one pair hands I want to bet or want to check. I do want to keep bluffing, however, for a 2/3 size with my gut shot and my club, or lots of just one single club hands. If I had just a random 9x with no straight draw, I might check that back to be a bluff catcher on a 4th club river, because I want that pot to be smaller with a marginal club on a 4-club river. But I would bet my low clubs just to sort of check back and steal a pot where I get called with a 9-club hand and bang off the 4th club on the river. And I'd also be betting at least my ace and probably my naked king of clubs as well to make the pot bigger for my 4th to value bet in the larger pot when that 4th club hits on the river. Or if it's a 3rd club, to go ahead and use my large club blocker as a bluff to barrel off with. So that's largely how I'm going to be splitting up my range on that turn, the lower left-hand table. The stuff I'm not so sure of is what do I do with the one pair hands, both with and without clubs. Second pair hands are going to be checked back almost exclusively. The real kicker comes down to the top pair hands with and without clubs. I'm not sure how I want to split those. That could go either way. I could see arguments for either, and I'm not sure what solver does. I know a lot of things about what solvers should do and what we should do for exploits, but I don't know everything. Sometimes you'll catch me talking through a scenario where I'm not sure exactly what I want to do, and that's not a farce. That's not false humility. I just don't know what to do in some of those spots, and that's one of them. Not sure what I would do with my top pair hands with and without a club in that spot. I'd have to think about that a bit more. Upper left-hand table, we're going to check in against the limper with king 9 and check our range on the ace-6 deuce. Probably just check fold any kind of bet here. However, when he goes ahead and checks back, he probably doesn't have too many strong hands, so we're going to go ahead and stab and try to take this pot away from him. On the river now with that double paired board, we actually have a decent bit of showdown value against any kind of weird low gut shot or weird kind of diamond draws. I'm going to check and hope he lets me show down my king high. I doubt I fold out too many pairs, but do have some showdown value, which thankfully manifested there. Whatever he checked back, we'll check in a minute. Against a cutoff open, 10-9 is towards the bottom of our defend range, but we're going to defend with it and check out of position. We're going to isolate this recreational limper under the gun, the lower left-hand table with the pocket jacks. He's short stacked, so if we can get a nice favorable flop, we're very happy to get that in. This guy bets pot. We've got a very marginal top pair. I guess we don't have too many top pairs. We got some Jack 10. We got some offsuit top pairs like Ace, King, Queen, Jack 10. We've got some weaker suited pairs that also call the flop, so we're just going to check once. Lower left-hand table, we're facing another pot bet. I don't see any reason to get involved and start heroing down here. I could have Queen 10. I would probably go into trap mode with Queen 10, given that he's betting so large. I guess, I could have some Queen X flush draws as well that are going to make some good check calls down. I can go ahead and fold this marginal second pair with him showing strength with the pot bets on the flop and the turn. Lower left-hand table, we open ace-3 suited under the gun. We got called by a middle position player. He doesn't show himself to be very fishy yet. He's been pretty active, but he's not calling a lot. He's mostly raising. He isn't limping, but he is calling from middle position. I don't think he's a true fish, but I think he's a marginal reg that's playing too many hands. We're going to check range to him and check call with our top pair weak kicker. Backdoor flush draw. Would love to peel a diamond or a 3 to really improve our hand, but we don't always get what we want. It's going to be pretty reasonable to go ahead and check call. We're going to consider him to be a reg. They're not too bluffy in position, but he bet half pots on the flop, which implies to be a bit more bluffy. 2/3, not so much. We're going to see what he does on the river. We're going to check to him one more time. Upper right-hand table, 10-7 suited is a reasonable hand to isolate with against the cutoff limper. I don't love that he's short-stacked. I'd rather it be against a guy that's deeper, and that's kind of towards the bottom of my isolation range anyway. If you're going to get spooked by this short stack in the small blind that might reship and force you to call off with 10 high, or the fact that the limper himself is also short and so you're not going to isolate quite as wide as I did there, I don't think that's a mistake. I think that's a reasonable train of thought and it's reasonable logic to follow. So if you were to just go ahead and fold that hand, I don't mind it as well. As I said, it is towards the bottom of my isolation range there in that situation, even before accounting for the shorter stacked fishy player. We check Rin from the big blind against the limper, and we check range out of position to one player on King Jack 4 two-tone in the upper left-hand table. I was going to start value betting that king on the turn, but now that the ace hits, I'm going to play it a bit slower instead. I guess you could bet to get value from all kinds of weird diamonds, clubs, Queen X, 10X type hands, even a hand like 3-5. Against that little min bet, I'm of course going to go ahead and call, and we're going to check again. The jack is also not great. It's another hand that now is ahead of us that previously was not. However, against the min bet, he has to just have so few bluffs there to be balanced, and it's very easy for a player, especially a fishy player with all kinds of bullshit in his range, to choose too many of those hands to bluff, and this is a trivial call for a min bet. Even though we're not going to be good a very large percentage of the time. We have to be good so infrequently for that to be profitable. That to me, it's not even worth arguing about any more than that. He's betting 1 into about 4 or 5. You got to be good 1 times out of 5 or 6. You've got second pair. He's got all kinds of BS in his range. Just call and go on to the next hand if you're beat. Upper right-hand table, recreational player completes the small blind. We're not going to raise him up with the 7 deuce suited. We're just going to check it in, and we get a very nice flop. We're going to go ahead and flat his bet with the straight draw and the flush draw. Looking to start bluffing if he checks. We're going to use a 2/3 size on the turn here, set him up to jam him on the river, probably whether we hit or whether we miss. I don't raise a ton in these blind on blind spots in position just because it makes the range easier to play, knowing that we still have our strong hands in the call line. I can still get money in by mixing in overbets on the turn after they check to me. If the stacks are deep, and that's what it takes. If you want to have a raising range on the flop against players, especially players that bet too much, that's certainly not a mistake. In fact, that's what a solver would tell you to do, is to have some raises against bets on that situation, and especially more so against players that bet too often. But if you want to do some simplifications to keep your range easier to play so you don't make mistakes and start wondering where your strong hands are, where your weak hands are, how you keep yourself balanced, if you have to keep yourself balanced, I don't hate that either. Lower right-hand table, we have a rec limps, a reg type player limps behind, a small blind completes. We're going to check in with our 8-10. Lower left-hand table, we get a 3x open and the small blind who calls. We're going to defend tighter with the small blind call, but still defend the king 10. We're going to open 9-8 in the upper right-hand table. We face a bet of 3 blinds into about 4. On the lower right-hand table, we're just flattened with our bottom 2. Terrible turn card for us as our 2 pair is now counterfeited. This is a good hand to to bluff raise with on the river because we block all the boats and we don't have nearly as much showdown value as we used to or would have liked. That said, I've got no reason to think this guy is doing that with too many bluffs. He's probably got a lot of kings. He was betting out into three other players in a limp pot. I'm just going to go ahead and fold this one when the counterfeit happens. Lower left-hand table, everyone checks the flop. I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing at this, thinking there's not too many sixes in anybody's range with nobody betting the flop or the small blind player not betting the turn. I shouldn't get away with that kind of stuff nearly as often as I do, but as long as I do, I'm going to keep doing it. Got 8-5 suited on the button in the lower left-hand table. That's a bit outside of a standard solver-approved button open range, though it certainly is on the cusp. These players haven't been tight, but they have been passive, so I think I'm going to get away with this enough to at least get to a flop that it justifies expanding my range. Like I said, not standard, but not too far outside of a standard open range at the same time, so we're going to do it. On the King 5 Deuce two-tone, we're going to go ahead and range bet. The fact that we've got middle pair and a backdoor flush draw is some nice backup. We're not playing with complete and total air in that spot, and we end up taking it down. Not going to call a 3.5x button open with Queen 4. We're not really going to call a button open with Queen 4 against just about any size. Maybe a min raise, but certainly not an exceptionally large 3.5x open. Really not even against a min raise. But the real point of that scenario is that if we have a 3.5x open as opposed to a more standard 2.5x type open, we need to get a lot tighter. The big blind in particular should be very sensitive to the sizing sizes, to the sizing the raise first in player uses. Now the small blind against the cutoff open of 3x, we're going to go ahead and 3-bet from the small blind with King Queen. That's a pretty standard 3-bet from the small blind against a cutoff open. We don't know too much about this guy other than he's probably somewhat reggish. He's only played an orbit or two and not enough hands to really understand if he's deviating too much either in one direction or the other from standard opening ranges, so we're just going to use a standard 3-bet range ourselves. 3.5x open from a presumed recreational player based on his stack of about 65 blinds to start, but he hasn't been particularly funky with his pre-flop stats. 25-15 no limps over 21 hands. At that stack size and that open size, my 3-bet needs to be 15-16 blinds, which really is more like a 4-bet or fold type situation. I would be re-raising to stack off with 10s or better here and then mixing in some bluffs. Probably about a 50-50 ratio of bluffs to value bets, but 7s are not going to be in there. Lower upper right-hand table, we raise the cutoff first in with aces. Ace, queen, 4, we get check 2. We're going to go ahead and range bet small. He snap calls me. Now we can have aces, queens, 5s, 4s. He should not have very many of those sets, so we're going to be using an overbet or check range. Our bluffs are going to be 6, 7, some of those gut shots to Broadway, probably the suited versions of them, and then in the offsuit ones that have a club, especially the king of clubs. I'm going to trap with the pocket aces, actually, just as we beat so much. We beat so much that he's going to continue with. Now we're going to go ahead and bet our hand on the river for value, try to get heroed by a queen. On the turn, we would have been betting 6, 7, and also a lot of our 6, 8. I guess we wouldn't have 6, 8, but we would have 7, 8. We've betting our 7, 8s as well. And probably also over betting. I don't really know if we have 4, 5. I guess we would have 4, 5 for the most part from the cutoff. That's about the bottom of our cutoff range. Let me pull that back up and make sure I'm reading that board correctly. Yeah. Ace, queen, 4, and then 5 with the backdoor flush draw pairing on the turn. We're going to be overbetting queens, 5s, 4s, ace, queen, ace, 5. Maybe check back ace, 4 is a trap, and check back the aces for sure. 4, 5 could go either way. It could either be a bet or a check. Probably bet that. Probably also overbet our ace, king, maybe our ace, jack, and ace, 10. Right around that range is where we'd start turning hands into checks as opposed to bets. Upper right-hand table, we open queen 10 suited from under the gun. The lower left-hand table, we get 3-bet in position by an aggressive reg-type player. Our 4-betting range really should be jacks, 10s plus to stack off because I think he's aggressive, and ace-king. Maybe use ace-queen offsuit and a couple wheel aces as our bluffs. Ace-10 is just going to be a fold. Against this player who bets into us 2 into 7, I could either raise all in with my open-ender and my overcard, my backdoor flush draw. He's probably pretty weak when he donks the flop like that, so we're just going to go ahead and put him all in. You could also flatten, play the turn, and probably move him in on the turn as well. I don't know what makes a big difference either way. He might get himself pot stuck with a hand that you can fold out in the flop but can't fold out in the turn, which is why I think raising over him on the flop is probably slightly better here. But I think either raising all in with the hand with this much equity or just flattening and playing the turn and planning to get him in on most turns unless he moves you in on a blank is going to be okay. But when he just jabs into you with that donk bet for such a small size, it's going to be so much BS in his range. It's not a particularly strong range. A lot of hands that can't call. My one pair of hands that are vulnerable also want to raise and not give him a chance to hit some draw with that little tiny small bet with that much money behind. So I think I'd like having a hand like queen 10 there as my raise as well. Button opens for 3x. We're in the big blind. We've got king, queen suited. We're going to re-steal with the roughly 15% range, of which king, queen is in there. We're going to defend the big blind against the 2.5x cutoff open with queen 5 suited. Over here in this blind on blind spot where he leads into us after completing the blind and we check, we're just going to fold with jack 9, no back doors. We're going to check range in the upper right-hand table on the ace 9 deuce, no back doors. He checks immediately. We're going to start probing at that turn. He raises us up small. If I've got an ace, I got a flush draw, I'm going to come along. If I've got a hand like ace 9 or deuces where I'm super strong, I'm going to go ahead and 4-bet him. Probably put in a pot size 4-bet. Yeah, pot size 4-bet would put 25, 50, 55 in there with about 100 behind, so it lets me 2x jam the river if I've got these real strong hands. Really turns his trip that he slow walks and then raises the turn small into bluff catchers. I guess if I need to find some bluffs to mix in there as well, perhaps a hand like 4-5 suited or 3-5 suited is going to be a real nice one, or maybe even like some kind of small flush draw with a 2 to block his full houses. I think those would be reasonable as well to do this with. I'm just going to fold given I've got total air, queen high, no draw. And we're going to wrap up this session after the next orbit. Lower left-hand table, we open sevens from the cutoff. We get checked 2 by the big blind on a 9-7-3 board. We're going to go ahead and range bet for a small size. He check calls. We peel an offsuit ace on the turn. We would have aces, nines, jacks, threes, ace, jack, ace, nine, ace, three suited, jack, nine suited, ace, king, ace, queen. A lot of those hands can be discounted from his range based on the pre-flop and or flop action. So this is going to be an overbet or check situation because we have so many nut hands that he does not. I also don't have any reason to want to bet a lot of marginal one-pair hands to deny equity with those, so I'm going to be happy using overbet or check. Pocket 7 should not be in any kind of overbetting range. You know, I don't even know if you would consider that for value or for a bluff. I don't like it as either of those type hands. I think it's just a hand to check back and evaluate the river. It's really not even a bluff catcher. It's probably more inclined to be a bluff on the turn than a value bet, I suppose. But I don't think it's a great hand for bluffing. I'd much rather be bluffing with open-ended straight draws like Queen 10, 10-8, various club draws. Now the question is, do I try to turn this hand into a bluff and move him off? I guess I could have some weak ace-x flush draws that check back the turn, and now I can go ahead and overbet the river with. I just want to try to fold him off a 9 or a jack, so I'm going to go ahead and actually overbet in this spot in the bet-check-bet line. I don't overbet in that line very often, but given that I can legitimately have some weak ace-x with the club draw that now got in there, as a function of my using an overbet size on the turn, I wouldn't be overbetting the weak ace-x type hands. I think that actually makes a bit of sense. Or, you know, maybe he understands what I'm doing, maybe he doesn't, but there's a semblance of logic to how I'm constructing that range. Whereas I wouldn't usually have an overbet line because I wouldn't usually have a lot of real strong hands in the bet-check-bet line because either, you know, hands like sets are almost always bet on the turn and hands like flush draws are always bet on the turn. So I don't usually have these real strong hands on the river in that line where I've checked the turn back. But in that particular spot where I'm overbetting the turn, where that ace peeled on the turn, and I can legitimately check back some hands like, you know, ace 3 of clubs, and now I want to go ahead and get some value, I think that makes a lot of sense to have some overbets there. And I'm also really targeting hands like Jack X or 9X in his range that can probably call in a bet-check-bet line for a 2/3 type bet, but against an overbetter, a lot more inclined to just lay it down. I think that actually makes some sense. I hope you guys agree, and I'm not just a rambling idiot with all that, but there was a method to my madness in using an overbet size in a spot where I wouldn't typically have them very frequently. And it was for a bluff, in case that wasn't crystal clear. I was not trying to get called by a worse hand there with my sevens. I was trying to bluff with the sevens. And the fact that I've got a club in my hand does play into it ever so slightly, although I don't really expect him to play a flush draw in that manner, so it's probably not a huge impact. Lower right-hand table, we open King 6 suited from middle position towards the bottom of our open range, but a reasonable hand to open. We get called in position by a rec and in the big blind by a player that seems pretty reggy. We're going to go ahead and check out of position just like we would do with our entire range. We got a pretty decent hand for this particular board. He min bets, and that player should be calling with the lot. The in position player could probably be stabbing with the lot. This hand is very vulnerable. I'm going to go ahead and actually check raise this and look to make them fold out nonsensical, not necessarily nonsensical, but overcards with a lot of equity, but don't have any real reason to call. I think a lot of those hands will actually fold to this, which my hand benefits from getting them to fold. Of course, if I hit a 6, I very much love the hand. A king is also a pretty good card for the hand as well. But I think I actually like check raising there on this particular scenario against that small bet a lot more than I like check calling. I could, of course, have a hand like ace deuce, 6s, pocket 2s. There's a king, but it's the worst king of the remaining kings in the deck as it completes the flush. I'm going to go ahead and check that now. I don't want to see him start shoveling money into that pot real big like he's got a flush. Well, he bets small. I'm quite okay to call down with my top 2, though, instead. I don't love seeing that 4-heart river. I hope he just checks back. I'm going to beat a hand like pocket 7s. Oh, he actually, I don't know why he would have called with king 10. That was a mistake to call with king 10 on the flop, and thankfully I had him reverse dominated, by virtue of hitting my 6 on the turn. He had me dominated, but the whole scenario flipped because that king made me top 2. So his flop bet might be okay just to kind of try to steal the pot for cheap, but I think calling the check raise is pretty shitty. Thankfully, even though he hit his overcard when he shouldn't have called and only burned him and not me. Rivering a king would have been hysterical because now he has to feel like his hand is good with kings full of deuces, and I'm sitting there with kings full of 6s. So I like the way that hand played out. I think my play was okay. That was about it. We're going to close up now. This is Charlie Murphy signing off. I hope you enjoyed what you watched.